Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
Good morning, I'm Rob Woodard. This is Sunday Journal. Today I'm with William Waterway. He is the author of Gay Head Lighthouse, First Light on Martha's Vineyard. Today we'll be discussing the history of that light, as well as current efforts to have it moved back. Good morning, William. Thanks for joining me today.
Rob, a pleasure to be here.
So this is a very interesting topic. Obviously, lots of people on the vineyard and around the world are familiar with this lighthouse, the iconic scene there with the brick lighthouse, the blue skies up on the hill. Tell me how the lighthouse came into being originally.
Originally, a senator from Nantucket petitioned the newly formed federal government of the United States to build a lighthouse on the promontory of the Gay Head Cliffs. And what was curious about this, Rob, it was a senator from Nantucket, not Martha's Vineyard.
Okay, that is interesting.
Isn't it? And the reason being, at that time in history, Nantucket was the whaling capital of the world. And also the leading candle manufacturer in the world of spermaceti candles, which were the brightest candles on Earth, which were in huge demand by wealthy people in Europe. Because you can imagine, back in those days, the only light being a candle. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're walking around in the dark. No flashlights.
So what was the purpose of the light initially? To safely guide the whale ships toward Nantucket?
Whale ships, but also the commercial ships.
Okay.
That would navigate the waters between the Elizabeths, and of course we had Devil's Bridge off of Gay Head Cliffs there. We have that half-mile underwater rock formation that they call Devil's Bridge because so many ships were wrecked on those rocks. So you have the heavy whale ships, the square-masted schooners. We just had the Charles W. Morgan come by.
Right, yeah, beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And to think there were thousands of those ships.
Right. Much smaller than I originally anticipated it would be.
Yes.
I figured something maybe 400. I don't know why, but something a little larger than you're going to go hunt whales. You're going to need a bigger boat, I thought.
Yeah, and to think, Rob, they'd be out to sea like 5 years, 6 years. You're right. You would think. The documentary, though, is well done. We learned a lot from that. Mm. But they had Nantucket's commercial interest at heart. And with Devil's Bridge being right at the base of the Gay Head Cliffs.
Devil's Bridge being some sort of underwater hazard?
It's a submerged rock formation in which a lot of ships wrecked upon. And so, of course, they were even wise back in those days, Rob, how to work the system. Because why should they take money out of their pockets?
Right.
This is a commercial enterprise, but no, they were already playing the game back then. They had the connections in Washington, so they petitioned our newly formed government, and it was budgeted and passed, and we had the lighthouse built in 1799.
And what you talked about the spermaceti candles, what was the original source of light in this lighthouse?
That was we were burning spermaceti oil in the very first lighthouse.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, the United States government required that all the lighthouses burn the spermaceti whale oil because it was so bright.
And what was there some sort of I would imagine there's a reflective material in the top of the lighthouse as well to sort of guide that.
In the first light, it wasn't as pronounced as or profound or bright. Eventually, it was. In 1844, when it was moved. By the way, we moved that lighthouse, which is a wooden octagonal.
The original one in Aquinnah. Okay.
It was wooden octagonal light, and in fact, it was so compact in a structure that the keeper had to use a ladder to get up to the lighting room, carrying the oil to fill the wicks there and to keep it burning. But because of erosion, they relocated that wooden structure, moved it back in 1844.
And tell me about the current structure that's there, the brick structure. When was that installed?
Well, that was they began construction in 1854 and completed it. It was all of 1854, 55. Completed it in 1856, and they illuminated the light in December of 1856.
And who's in charge of this light at this point? Originally, when they built the wooden hexagonal structure, who owned it?
That was owned by the federal government.
Okay, so the federal government until relatively recently, the federal government has always owned. I guess they consider it an aid to navigation, of course.
Yeah, but it was owned by the United States of America, but it was governed by organizations that were appointed by representatives, congressional representatives, by the people. And it wasn't until the Coast Guard took control of all the aids of navigation in the United States. And by the way, that was the first time in U.S. history that the military took over a civilian branch of government. And that's when they took over all the lighthouses and aids to navigation. So, and that happened around 1935. But it was owned by the United States of America. They had a management system in place, and it was a lot of turmoil. We had different permutations and different names for the lighthouse organizations that basically manage the lighthouses in the United States, Rob. But yeah, again, it was civilian oriented, and it was a spoil system. A lot of the keepers throughout history were appointed depending on your loyalty to whatever party was.
Political patronage.
Right
like
from the beginning,
it
was the same old, Rob. We have it today.
I do. So this thing has been continuously in operation as an aid to navigation since the mid-1700s. Or late 1700s. You said
1799.
Okay, 1799.
And then we moved it in 1844. We spiffed it up a little bit, but then came the invention of the Fresnel lens in France. All right, now that was something that was historic. It was spectacular. And the Fresnel lens, they started making them and using them in Europe. And all of the whaling captains and commercial captains were coming back to America and saying, God, the lights over in Europe are so much brighter. We can see them far out at sea compared to the American lights. And so we did. We sent over some representatives like we do today, some congressional representatives. They did a tour, and they came back, and I said, we're going to buy these for all the lighthouses in the United States. However, at that time, the most sophisticated lens, Fresnel lens, was ordered for the Gay Head light.
And why was that? Why was the Gay Head light chosen? Because of its position and what it was designed to accomplish?
That and its position. It was considered one of the top 10 most important lighthouses in the United States. Now, you have to consider, Rob, that time in history, that window. In the mid-1800s, we had, according to 3 sources that I researched, up to 80,000 sailing vessels. Now, we didn't have engines yet. Sailing vessels, 80,000, passing under the Gay Head Cliffs, between the Elizabeth Islands and the Gay Head Cliffs.
Is that right?
Every year. It was the second busiest shipping lane in the world next to the English Channel.
Is that because of the port of New Bedford and the ports on Nantucket and the fact that they have to navigate the Elizabeth Islands and then, of course, get by Martha's Vineyard? And
well, the ships, if you look at the Atlantic Ocean, have you ever seen Ben Franklin's Gulfstream chart?
No.
Okay.
You're putting me on the spot.
I am. But you seem to be such an historian, Rob.
I love history, but I haven't seen that.
I mean, you live up in Aquinnah, you got a sense of things. But if you look at the Atlantic Ocean and traveling from Europe when we started settling America, you'd come along the Gulf Stream and then naturally come up to the coast of Cape Cod, and we didn't have the Cape Cod Canal.
Sure.
And so they'd have to swing around the Gay Head promontory there and then pass us, and then they go up the Sound toward New Bedford to New York, Newark, New Jersey to Pennsylvania. So where all the big cities were growing. So huge commerce there.
Right.
And vice versa. We were settled, as you know, to provide raw materials to Europe. Right. And so it was a two-way street for the shipping lanes. So a lot of goods were leaving America, coming around Cape Cod and going around the Gay Head promontory there and then sailing to Europe and vice versa. And then we had Ben Franklin discovering the Gulf Stream, which created a superhighway.
For the ships.
For the ships. Now, they were trimming about 3 weeks after he discovered it and showed them the chart and made copies and printed them himself and distributed them. 3 weeks is a lot of time.
Yeah.
It saves a lot of money. And so, wow, things really started going because we created back then, that was a superhighway between Europe and the United States. And that superhighway, the Gulf Stream, goes right by Martha's Vineyard.
Sure, obviously obviating the need for this important navigational aid.
Yes.
I'm Rob Woodard. This is Sunday Journal. Today I'm with William Waterway. He is the author of Gay Head Lighthouse, First Light on Martha's Vineyard, and we are discussing that very important navigational aid on Aquinnah. So what are some of the things that our listeners would be surprised to hear about this light, besides the fact that I did not know that it was so important at the time to getting these ships safely to and from their various ports. What are some of the other things that people may be surprised to hear about it?
Well, the Gay Head Light, I think what would surprise them is, first of all, is that the light that was installed in 1856 was so sophisticated. And it, by the way, it won first prize at the World's Fair in Paris.
Right. And was it not on top of the Eiffel Tower? Is that where it was originally placed?
No.
Or a light of this type?
No. Well, God, that'd be kind of interesting if it was. But, God, that'd be remarkable.
I don't know if that was true.
Yeah. No, it didn't. However, we did have 3 Fresnels in the United States, but none as sophisticated as this one. And so it came over and it was installed. And so when it was first illuminated, there was only a small audience. By the way, for the historic record, and do you know why? I'll ask you and your audience, your sophisticated audience out there in the Cape and Islands. Here's a question for you. Why was there no news reported, no documentation of all the bricks that were used to build the Gay Head Light, the brownstone that caps off the balcony at the top of the light and adds the weight to hold it down in all the hurricanes, the lighting room that is very sophisticated, made out of cast iron, custom made, and the Fresnel lens itself, which weighs tons. How come there's no documentation of how all of these materials and the light itself, everything got to the vineyard? Now, back in the days, we didn't have any engines, so everything was done with ox carts and wagons and horses.
They didn't want any competition getting that information?
Well, there was nothing, no documentation whatsoever. And the reason, and I looked, and I was shocked, Rob, because here I am trying to get that answer.
Sure.
And I want that to be part of my book. This is the historic record.
Right.
So what I discovered was, because the federal government did not advertise the bids for the lighthouse in the Vineyard Gazette, that the owner of the Gazette at the time, Marchant, was so ticked off, and also too, as his friends were on the island who wanted to bid on it, that he literally reported nothing on the lighthouse to show those guys in Washington who has the power on Martha's Vineyard, who has the last word. So he didn't report one story the entire time.
That is interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
That is, considering this state-of-the-art thing is going in on the island, and no one's being
state-of-the-art in the United States, Rob.
Right. So back to the book.
Yes.
How can what inspired you to write it?
I wrote it because my nonprofit, Vineyard Environmental Research Institute, took over the lighthouse in 1984 when it was going through the process of accessing. So that got me involved, and then my nonprofit took over the Gay Head Light and 2 other lighthouses on the island with a 35-year lease. So that's what got me plugged in. And so I've been involved with the Gay Head Light and East Chop Light and Eggertown Light since 1985. So I know a lot of the history, which made me a natural fit to write this book.
Sure, yeah. Anybody who's interested in history, and particularly in marine history, I think would find this a fascinating book. If someone were interested in purchasing it, Amazon.com, I can imagine.
Yeah, all over the place,
stores.
Barnes & Noble. By the way, we used to paint the lighthouse. This is what I discovered in my research, with red clay from the cliffs.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
The outside of the light
That
was
makes
painted with red clay. It was red clay that was dried and pulverized and mixed with linseed oil, and they used that to paint the outside of the Gay Head Light.
Well, it makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't it?
It fits it right into that area.
Yes.
We just have about a minute left, William. With just some final thoughts on the Gay Head Lighthouse, and if people want to find out more.
Certainly go to SaveGayHeadLighthouse.org.
And that is the effort to move the lighthouse back from the cliffs where the cliffs are eroding, and we're really in danger of losing this structure to the sea.
We are, Rob. Yes. And it's a huge fundraising effort, but you'll learn a lot about the lighthouse at that website, and it'll allow you to perhaps attend some events. We do a 10K event in the fall, so there's a lot of fun for you if you like going to the vineyard.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, William. It's a fascinating topic. I look forward to delving a little more in depth into the book. So
thank you, Rob.
Thanks for being here.
You bet.
Today I was with William Waterway. He is the author of Gay Head Lighthouse, First Light on Martha's Vineyard. We were discussing that structure, its importance to the maritime industry, and the history of its building. I'm Rob Woodard. This is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at CapeCodBroadcasting.com.